Os bydd y larwm tân yn canu, gadewch i'r ystafell drws y llanfa dan agosaf. Ni ddylid defnyddio liftiau. Dylai unrhyw unigolyn sydd â phroblem gyda'r grisiau ysbysu un o swyddogion y cyngor. Ymgynnull ar y lawnt o flaen dy brynfa neuadd y dref. If the fire alarm sounds, please leave by the nearest available marked fire exit. Lifts must not be used. If your use of stairs would be a problem, please inform the council officer. Congregate on the green outside the Guildhall reception. Sicrhewch bod dyfeisiau symudol ar y botwm tawel neu'n cael ei diffodd. Mobile devices should be turned to silent or off. Mae'r cyfarfod yn cael ei wyddarlledu'n fyw a bydd posib gwylio'r cyfarfod eto o'r archif. Os ydych yn eistedd yn oriel y cyhoedd, gall y cymerau droi atoch chi hefyd a thybir eich bod yn caniatau cael eich ffilmio. This meeting will be broadcast by the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing from archives. If you are in the public gallery, the cameras may also capture your image and you are deemed to be consenting to being filmed.
Pnawn da. Just to explain, the chair of this committee is Councillor Carrie Harper, and as she is a signatory to the call-in notice, which is the reason for convening this meeting, which is the only item on this agenda, I've advised her that as a signatory it would not be appropriate for her to chair the meeting, as she couldn't be entirely objective and fair in making sure that the meeting was handled appropriately. Regrettably, our vice chair is unable to be here this afternoon. Therefore, I would invite the members of this committee to nominate a chair for this afternoon's meeting. Is there a seconder for Councillor Mike? Thank you. If you'd like to assume the position of chair for the meeting.
Thank you for that. Obviously, we don't have a great number of call-ins to consider, but procedurally we've got this one which falls to this committee this afternoon. We've had a brief pre-meeting prior to the meeting proper, and we're trying to look at a way forward that we can be as open and transparent as we can be, but obviously there are certain issues that we will need to discuss or may want to discuss in more detail, which are perhaps sensitive and involve figures that we would need to do in part two. I understand from the legal officer that the leader of the council is happy for the building to be named, so that does release, I mean it's no great secret at the moment, I think everyone knows that already, but on the basis of that, what I would suggest is that we take in part one the receipt of the call-in, Councillor Mark Jones's delivery in terms of his comments that he'd like to make on the call-in, the leader of the council's response to that delivery, and then when we get to the stage of perhaps wanting to look into the background of how the decision was arrived at and whether we feel it appropriate that it goes back to the board, we will probably go into part two then to discuss that in more detail. Whether we need to go back into part one with the final recommendation, I don't know.
I would have you, sorry, unfortunately I haven't got the pack in front of me, but I presume we've got things like apology and declaration of interest before we go into the substance of the meeting, if you want to just take the meeting through that. Okay. And then perhaps I'll make some observations. That's all right, Chair. You weren't expecting to be chairing the meeting this afternoon, in fairness, but I thought just as a matter of form, perhaps we ought to just deal with those. Yes, remiss of me that really. I just thought we. Can we have apologies for absence if there are any?
Councillors Brian Apsley and Adrian Durrett.
Right, so that's Councillors Brian Apsley and Adrian Durrett. No others? Okay, and does any member have a declaration of interest that they need to declare? No, okay. So item 3 on the agenda is exclusion of press and public, but that's where we've got to the stage in the agenda. So what I was saying is that perhaps if we hear Councillor Jones' delivery on the call-in, Councillor Pritchard's response, if we need to go into details in terms of looking at that in more detail, we can go into part 2. Would we, Charlotte, need to go back into part 1 to move the resolution in terms of whether we are referring it back or not ultimately?
My recommendation to you is that if your deliberations on the matter are largely in part 2, that it would be a decision that would be made in part 2. The outcome of the meeting will be the subject of minutes, and those would in any event be published and made known at a later date in any event.
Okay, so members, you've got the report in front of you in detail, and if I can draw your attention to Appendix 1, I think it is, which is the notice of call-in, and also in relation, do you want to comment, Tracy, in terms of the procedure on call-in?
Okay, so on the 21st of January, the Chief Officer, Governance and Customer received a notice of call-in of the Executive Board decision that was made on the 14th of January relating to the Office Accommodation Review Phase 3, in particular Decision 3. The decision notice relating to this matter and the reasons are outlined in the report in paragraph 2.2. And then the Chief Officer, Governance and Corporate confirmed that the notice of call-in did comply with the timescales, etc., set out in 7.23 of the Council's Rules of Procedure, and informed the Leader of the Council and the Chief Executive that the decision may not be implemented until the call-in process has been concluded. So for consideration today then is that decision notice and the reasons outlined in the report, Appendix 1, which is the notice of call-in and outlines the reasons for that, Appendix 2, which is the report of the lead member for organisation, finance, performance, health and safety and governance, which gives the background to that decision. And then following the consideration of that decision and the reasons for the call-in outlined today, the committee must consider whether to refer the decision back to the Executive Board for consideration. And there are only 2 outcomes from the meeting, either to refer the decision back for consideration and the committee must identify the reasons for that, or the committee decides not to support the call-in to refer the decision back to the Executive Board for reconsideration. If so, the Chief Officer, Governance and Customer will advise the Leader of the Council and the Chief Executive that the decision may be implemented immediately thereafter. And I think it's also useful to point out that it is slightly different the scrutiny call-in meeting. It's intended as a quick process which invites scrutiny to support the referral back to decision maker for reconsideration, a decision they've made but before it's implemented. So it's not the equivalent of a full scrutiny review or inquiry in respect of which there may have been a call for and heard of evidence from a number of participants both inside and outside of the council.
Okay, Tracy. So if I can now refer you to Appendix 1, which is the notice of call-in of the executive decision, which was made on the 14th of January. In particular, the reasons for the call-in, because that's obviously what we have to focus on this afternoon. So there is quite a few paragraphs there running on page 7 and page 8 in terms of the call-in procedure. So are you all happy that I invite Councillor Mark Jones to address committee to support the notice of call-in? Okay. Councillor Mark Jones, if you'd like to deliver.
Thank you. Obviously, I'm grateful for the opportunity to have this discussion. I'm more grateful that we're able to have it in part 1 in open session, because that was the point of having this call-in. The 5 members who did sign the call-in did so on the basis that there was a principle involved here, and I think we could have saved all of us a lot of time had that principle been accepted at Exec Board, but it wasn't. So here we are, discussing Centre 67, the old vicarage on Roasley Road. And I think, from my perspective, the reason why I felt so strongly about this was because it is an important building. It's an important part of our built heritage in my ward. I didn't feel it impacted on staff, and the only financial issue was the estimated cost of demolition, which I'm more than happy to redact in any public document. because it is, after all, only an estimated cost of demolition. But because that decision had been taken in private, I was unable to discuss this with my fellow Rhosty community councillors. I was unable to discuss this with residents, and I was unable to discuss it with people who I know have a commercial interest in purchasing this property. And that's where I found it necessary to go after this call-in, because I think it is an important issue that we can't just allow to be held behind closed doors. And my concern was that had things stood and we hadn't done this, we would have ended up with the bulldozers moving in, and that would have been the first time that people would have been aware of it, and it would have been too late then. And I don't think that's the way we should be operating as a council. So I'm very glad that the committee has decided to hold this in open session. I'm very grateful to you for that, because Wrexham has lost a lot of its built heritage over the years. Some of us are old enough to remember Stephen's Cafe being demolished on a Sunday morning, and the fiasco of the vegetable market facade being demolished. And we shouldn't repeat those mistakes. We should always be mindful of the importance of our built heritage, especially as we're in the process of spending £2 million on renovating and reviving 17 heritage buildings in the town centre, something I'm incredibly proud of. I think the council has done a great job there. But what sort of message does it send out if at the same time we're demolishing a part of our important built heritage at the same time? As I see it, we've got 4 options for this building. I'm sure the experts may disagree, and we can have a good debate on that, but at least we're having a debate. I don't think one of those 4 options is to leave it lying empty for another 20 years. That's been a scandal, and it's been happening for far too long. As far as I'm concerned, we have an option to sell it off for commercial use, whether for apartments or a training academy, which is what the 2 options were on the table previously. We could allow the community to develop it for a community use. We could adapt it as part of a wider housing scheme on the site. And only then would we consider demolition as a last option. Now, my problem with the previous report was that demolition was the only option on the table. It was the first and only option. And I have to ask myself why. I was also told that there would be no demolition without local member support. When I was first elected in June 2017, I had a meeting and was told that that was the opinion of the council leader. Now, I don't know why that changed, but the first I heard of demolition being proposed was in the exec board minutes when I last saw them. So I would ask you to try and keep as much of this in the public domain. I'm very pleased that we're able to discuss this now in public, and that people of Rhosty actually know where this is, because it has sparked a lot of alarm about what's being demolished and what isn't. So I'm glad that we can tell people the truth now, and that we can be open and transparent about that. Thank you.
Is there anything else you wish to add, Mark, in terms of the reasons for the call-in? In particular, you mentioned there that, obviously you've mentioned again today that the future of buildings should be discussed more fully in open agenda, but you also make reference in the call-in to the possibility of social housing on the site.
I've got nearly 500 people waiting on the council housing list for properties in Rhosty. I believe that's the largest, or the biggest demand in any ward in the borough. And that's for a reason. It's convenient, it's popular, it's where people want to live. I'm very keen to see that wider site developed for social housing, and I'm sure we can have a debate about that as well. I think this could be part of that development, and I don't see it as a hindrance to that development. So that was the reason I raised the social housing. This is not to hinder any development. This is actually to enable it.
Okay, I think obviously from our part for the call-in, our remit here today is to consider the call-in and whether the item should go back to the executive board for them to reconsider their decision. It's not for us to come to a conclusion that their decision should be changed and this is what we want. you know, regardless of which of your 4 options you may prefer. That's not our remit today. We're here to consider whether the Executive Board have come to their deliberations with all the information that they needed to, and whether we agree with that or whether we disagree. If we disagree with it, well, we would refer it back, obviously, for further consideration. So I think in-depth discussions in terms of some of those alternative uses won't happen, certainly in the public domain today, but it may well be that they raise, if we move into part 2, we can understand better how the Executive Board came to their decisions on things. So you're okay now. Anything else you wish to say at this stage? No? Okay, so Mark, could I ask Council Leader to respond, as I said, on the basis of what we've just heard?
Thank you, Chair. Can I thank the elected members for supporting that it does go into part 1, and then obviously I'm sure it'll go into part 2 later on in the debate. But I think it was important for myself as a leader of the council to be given the opportunity to explain to yourselves why we decided to go for the demolition of Centre 67. And I was a little bit surprised and disappointed that there was a point of order raised at the Executive Board by the local elected member, Councillor Mark Jones, with reference to the demolition. Because I met Mark Jones in late December 2017, and the elected member of that ward supported the demolition of the building, subject to a discussion and caveats about social housing on that site. And I respect that, and I support it. I have no problem with it at all. So I'm going to just read from the script, as we say, to give the elected members and the members of the public an understanding of why I'm sitting here today, and then I'll just cover why we should go into part 2 in certain areas. Thank you, Chair. This is my response as the leader of the council to the call-in. The decision to demolish Centre 67 formed part of a wider decision of the council's office accommodation review, which is being progressed on a phased approach. The building was closed many years ago, and in fact the Executive Board decided to demolish the building a long time ago, as long as February 2012. So that decision was made in 2012 to demolish the building. The decision was reviewed and demolition was deferred. Although steps have been taken to prepare the building for demolition with the removal of the utilities, gas, water, electric, etc., in 2014 the Executive Board authorised a marketing exercise but decided not to progress with the disposal at that time. The building has no current need, the council has no current need for the building. We've gone through our process within the authority, asked all departments if any of them wanted it, needed it, required it, and they've said no. So that has been done, and I wouldn't expect anything less as lead member of assets. The council has no current need for the building, which is not DDA compliant, which is not meets the disability compliance, and it would not be cost effective to bring the building up to require the standards. Any further information surrounding the decision will only be provided with regards to contractual agreements and staff in part 2. And I think Councillor Mark Jones mentioned at his opening remarks that it was just about the building. It wasn't. Mark Jones, who's the elected member of that ward, understands that there's other service providers on that site. So that has implications on the staff. So it isn't just about the cost of the demolition of the building, it's about having discussions with the staff on what happens with them buildings as well. So I think there's a bigger picture here, a much bigger picture for obvious reasons. But I do come back to it. I am surprised to be sitting here today with this call-in, and only the reason being that I did speak to the local member, and I will repeat myself again, that he supported the demolition, and he did confer that, and he did confirm it when we went into part 2 at the Executive Board, which he called for a point of order in part 1. But that's history, and we have to move forward. So coming back to this Centre 67, just in my presentation, just quickly, I'll give you a little bit of a history lesson on it. For some elected members who have been here a long time, there's no need or requirement for it. With regards to our redundant buildings, we have decided where and when we can achieve putting affordable homes on there and building, we will do it. We've done it with Nancillin, and I think that's to be celebrated, that there's a need and requirement for social housing. We've demolished it, we've put in affordable homes on that site. I think it would be a great shame to the residents and the constituents of Rostee if this opportunity was missed. We have an opportunity now with a redundant building which is not listed, that it's been around for a long time, and this council has messed about with it for far too long, and we need to move forward on that side. There's a massive demand, and Councillor Mark Jones is quite right, for affordable homes and social housing in that ward. The list goes on and on. So what we want to do as a council, and we have aspirations to do this, is to demolish the building, clear the site in the future, and put some homes on that site. And I can't see anything wrong with that. And Councillor Mark Jones, you know, he's been quite vocal in the past. I'm sure he'll be vocal in the future that Wrexham, there's a need and a requirement for affordable homes. Well, here's your opportunity as the elected member to support this. Build some homes on that site where there's a massive need. Chair, I can go on, but I won't. I think I've said as much as I can say at this moment in time. And can I apologise, Chair? I do have to leave in the next 5 minutes. I have to be at another meeting. I do apologise, but thank you for that opportunity. Thank you, Chair.
Mark, you wanted to come back in?
Just on a couple of the points raised there. When we met, I was presented with the only option was demolition. When I was subsequently informed that there were two offers on the table, one was for a training academy, one was to turn it into apartments. Both of those were high six-figure sums of money. When I became aware of that, I made it clear that I wasn't in favour of demolition until those two options had been exhausted. As far as I'm concerned, those two options have not been exhausted. And so I think that needs to be corrected. Also, I think I've made it clear in the call-in that I am 100% in favour of social housing. I'm not in favour of selling it off for the maximum price, as has been mooted. And I think we should be aiming to work with and around this building in the same way as we work with and around TPO trees, for example. We have an acceptance that we want to retain our environment in terms of natural environment. I think we should have the same regard for our built environment. And yes, there will be extra costs, but we've seen with other social housing that we've put together in Plasmadog and in Nancillin, they have been costly because we've insisted on the best standards. So I don't think we should just disregard it just because there's going to be an extra cost in terms of DDA. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I'm sure some of this will come out when we move into part two, and we can discuss things more specifically in terms of proposals for the site and what's been considered and what hasn't, and indeed the possible commercial sale and so on. But I think that's for part two rather than part one. If you want to come in, Mark, and I'll ask members if they've got any questions of you before you go.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to come back in. Just quickly, for a point of correction, really, Councillor Mark Jones has just indicated that it was muted, was your words, that we'd sell it off to the highest price. We haven't had them conversations, we haven't had them discussions, and that's what worries me sometimes. The people say things which are incorrect and not true. We haven't had a discussion to sell it off for the highest price. We haven't really had a discussion on what's going to be put there. That will come after the decision has been made on Centre 67, as I told you when we had the meeting in late December. Thank you, Chair.
But you did make reference earlier, Mark, to a marketing exercise, and of course that may be where the expressions of interest came from. I don't know, but that again will come out in part two, I guess. If the leader's got to go, if anyone's got any specific questions whilst he's here, Danny, you indicated first, and then I'll bring Carrie and Paul.
Thank you, Chair. It's just some clarity. So, Councillor Jones, very keen on social housing. I just wanted clarity, is that the direction, the preferred direction of the council? Because if it is, there seems to be... Yeah,
Well,
same page.
Yeah, we're going into future uses of the site again, aren't we? So that will have to be in part 2, I think.
Right, okay then.
This is where it gets difficult when we go from one to the other. Carrie?
Yeah, just a question on the process really to the leader in terms of why the ward member wasn't formally consulted before this went to the executive. Our constitution would indicate that as ward members, that on a decision like that we should be consulted, and I think that would concern all of us around the table really, that we could potentially have a building in our wards agreed for demolition by the executive board without any input. Thanks.
Could I just check with Shannon, is it within the constitution that that's the correct protocol?
I'm not sure exactly where that's found in the Constitution. I suspect it's more to do with the standard procedures in relation to dealing with assets. It's an internal process rather than in the Constitution. I think I need you to
But I think someone over here did say then that it was the procedure that we normally follow.
Yes, Chair, just for confirmation, it's in the checklist. Listen, I have the officer to the side of me. I can't really speak on behalf of Steve. I'm sure he can speak for himself. What I will say is, as the political discussions took place in December 2017, and I will repeat myself, the local elected member of Rusty supported the demolition of the site. If there was a discussion after with officers and Mark, I don't know, and I'm not going to get into that. That's up to Steve to elaborate on, but it is in the checklist of things to do. Yes, it is.
Okay, Paul.
Just a point of clarity. Councillor Mark Pritchard, if I heard it correctly, was talking about affordable homes, and Councillor Mark Jones was talking about social housing. I thought there were two different aspects. I thought affordable homes were different to social housing. Just want clarity on that, please.
I think they can be, but it's not necessarily mutually exclusive.
I'll just touch on it quickly, Chair, and I think it's important that, you know, we do cover this, and it is an important point, and I take on board what Councillor Dana Davis had said, and I do know we're drifting a little bit, but no decision has been made. Now, what I would say, what could, and this is just, you know, my opinion, you might have a mixture. You might have affordable homes, you might have some social, you might have all social housing on the site. The council might decide to sell it to a developer. Them discussions haven't taken place. And I think it's important that we all understand that. And what I would say is, I think the lead member, Councillor David Griffiths, has made his position very clear. And for the first time, we're building social council housing stock in Wrexham. And I keep on saying it, and I said it at the Executive Board Part 2, and that's why I'm so pleased I'm allowed to say it now. We will have them discussions, and we'll make a political decision on what happens with that site after the issue around Centre 67 is resolved. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, any other questions at this point in the proceedings? Because I think we'll be probably moving into part 2, won't we?
Yeah.
So I think the open part that we obviously has named the building, we've got the call, the flavour of the calling, we've heard the leader's response. If members want to sort of drill down into how the decision was arrived at and some of the background rationale, remember it's not for us to say we don't like what the Executive Board have done, so we want to send it back. We've got to look at the process, and what we need to do is, as part of that, understand the process by questioning the officers, particularly in terms of what was in the report and what's gone to the board. So with that, I'm mindful to move into part 2, if you're okay with that, so that we can have a free discussion in terms of figures and options and so on. So do I need to read the declaration?
Members will have seen the report or the pack, but yes, probably prudent to read it out and have a formal decision on that. Chair.
Okay, so I shall now read the relevant section, which is in considering whether to exclude the press and public from the next part of the meeting. Members are asked to consider the following factors when determining the public interest test. Agenda item 4, not for publication by virtue of paragraph 14 of part 4 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended. The proper officer has determined in considering this report that paragraph 14 should apply. Her view on the public interest test is while she was mindful of the need to ensure the transparency and accountability of public authorities for decisions taken by them in relation to the spending of public money, disclosure of the information would give an unfair advantage to tenderers for commercial contracts. This information is not affected by any other statutory provision which requires the information to be publicly registered. On that basis, she felt that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. It is therefore recommended that the press and public be excluded from the meeting during consideration of the item, as it is likely that if they were present, there would be disclosure to them of exempt information as defined in paragraph 14 of part 4 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended. So could we have a vote on moving into part 2, please? That's carried. Okay, so if I could ask please the press to withdraw.